Hello, how are you? How has your week been? Hopefully you're doing okay in lockdown and managing everything and finding some time to find some joy and reflect on life as we were talking about last week. So this is the second in our series of talks on joy, living your best life, holding nothing back. And this was originally given, this talk, at our October special, which we were still allowed to run at number 49. So some of you will have heard this before, and for some of you this will be brand new. And when we began, I read some words out from a dear friend of ours called Karen, who some of you will know. She's actually celebrated her 60th birthday this week, so happy birthday, Karen. Can't believe you're that old. I'm a lot older, of course, but I still think of you in your mid-40s. But you've had quite a year. There's been a lot going on in your family, and during one of your reflective times, you sent me a text with these words, which I'm going to start with. I feel very strongly God is preparing me. I have David's words as a mere shepherd saying he will fight Goliath, and when everyone laughs and dismisses him, he remembers that with God he defeated wild beasts, and it's with God he will slay Goliath. Now, you know this is not how I see myself, more of a Gideon, methinks. But God's thoughts are higher than our thoughts, and I want to start believing what he thinks about me. Satan has been stealing for too long. It's time to reclaim the land. And apart from being amazingly encouraged and excited for my friend Karen, it really struck a chord with me because it reminded me of something written by the author who's been played quite a big part in forming our theme this time, a chap called Erwin Raphael McManus. And he's written some great books which have been very inspiring, and I know that Karen is reading one of them at the moment called Chasing Daylight, which is all about this thing of finding and living your best life. But our little series of joy, holding nothing back, is really based on another book of his called The Last Arrow, and based on a character in the Old Testament that we started talking about last week, a chap called Elisha. Now, Erwin Raphael McManus now runs an amazing creative church and has written loads of books, but he tells his story of growing up as being a very different experience. His dad was basically a con man. So if any of you have watched the film of Catch Me If You Can, apparently his dad was almost like the main character in that. They could trust nothing he said or nothing he did. And in fact, in later life, they even found out that their name, McManus, wasn't even real. He just adopted it. And at some point in Erwin's life, his father just left them. And he remembers trying to stop his father driving away and his father almost running him over. And that was the last time he saw him for years and years and years. And there was this separation between them. And then when Erwin's son got into teenage years, he said that he would like to meet his grandfather. So they did some research and found out where he was, and they went to meet him, and it was a perfectly amicable meeting. But then as they were leaving, Erwin's father took his son aside and said these words to him. "Your dad," he said, "he was average. He was just average. His brother was exceptional, but your dad, he was just average." And Erwin was really upset about this, as you can imagine, but it wasn't because his father had said those things about him. It was because something deep inside him told him that it was true, that all of his life he'd made his home in being average, if not below average, because he found safety and solace being just a little bit invisible and a little bit obscure. And it challenged him, and he said, "I don't believe that anyone is born average, but I do believe that many of us choose to live in that place." And so he walked away from that encounter with his father absolutely determined that although he had no control over his own levels of talent or intelligence or whatever his DNA makeup was, but he would from then on take control over his personal responsibility to develop and maximize whatever potential God has given him for the good of others. And recently I was not very well. It wasn't COVID, but I was proper poorly. I think it probably was flu. And so I was in for at least a week in the house, and I got this real urge to do some tidy up. And coming into this room that I'm speaking from today, which is kind of the office, I went through lots of old files and papers and found archives of things that have been part of our history in Storm over many years now. And it just made me reflect on some of the things that we in Storm have done. So I think one of our first projects, we were the first group that painted the underpass in Worthing, the one that goes through from the train station into the main town. And that was in the year 2000. We raised money to do a project there, and we painted pictures. We worked with lots of different churches and youth groups in the town. Every one of them had a different oblong to paint. It took us probably about a week to complete it, and then it was covered with special solutions so that it would last forever. And overnight people slept on site until it was all finished. That was an amazing project that we were part of, just making the gateway into our town something beautiful and something to celebrate. And we then raised money to buy a double-decker bus, which was amazing. We were Storm, and we worked alongside a wonderful chap called Wing from Queen Street Fellowship to start Worthing Street Pastors, which is still running, but we were certainly responsible for running it for 10 years. We put together Worthing Winter Night Shelter, which has been running now for 5 or 6 winters, with lots and lots of different churches based on the housing justice model, but that was something that Storm oversaw. We were responsible for putting crazy knitting on the penguins at the hospital, having spent quite a bit of time getting permission to do that. We were in the first batch of people who planted seafront gardens on the seafront at Worthing, and have continued to do that ever since. We were responsible for the Poppy Waterfall project. I don't know if you saw that a couple of years ago. One of the major anniversaries of the First World War. 100 years since the end of the First World War, and thousands of poppies, over 10,000 poppies, were knitted and crocheted by people all around Worthing, and we oversaw that project. And you've probably seen our knitted angels at Christmas. I think this year is probably our 5th year of doing that. We're hoping to knit 1,000 this year, and now we've taken on a lease of a property on Rowlands Road, number 49, and starting a new adventure there. So there's been amazing things where we've initiated things, halfway down the line wondered what on earth we'd started, but certainly feeling like there were things for us to do and to celebrate in our community. And I remember in my late 30s when we'd had our children, we were living in a village in the Midlands, and probably a pretty comfortable life, not rich, not poor, settling into life, and God really challenging us whether we were going to stay there and that would be what we did, or whether we were going to pioneer some things for God. And this reminds me and takes me back to this character that we are looking at the moment, Elisha, and hopefully re-inspires us to dare to plan and dream new things. And this whole thought of just leaving nothing undone, that is, kind of on our card for us to do. So the last time we met Elisha was right at the beginning of his call to be a prophet for God. And you remember we met him ploughing in his field. He was a farmer, and he chops up his plough and cooks his oxen and says farewell to his old life and walks into the unknown, knowing that God has called him to be a prophet. So this story today is right at the end of his life, and over the coming months we'll look at some of the stories in between. But in our story today, Elisha is dying. He's at the end of his life, but he's still very valued by the king, and the king, Jehoash, is facing a great enemy, and he needs some advice. And so he calls poor old Elisha and says, "What do I do?" And Elisha says to him, "Well, pick up your bow and arrow." And Elisha puts his hands on the king's hands on the bow and arrow, and they pull it and they shoot the arrow through the east facing window, and it flies off into the distance. And Elisha says, "That is God's arrow, and that is a sign that God will give you victory over your enemies. Now pick up the rest of your arrows and bang them on the ground." And so Jehoash picks up the arrows and he bangs them, 1, 2, 3, and then stops. And Elisha says, "Why have you stopped short? You should have banged and banged and banged until you saw complete victory. That was your part of this prophecy. God was in the arrow being shot out. That's his bit. This is your part, the bit that you have to do to hit those arrows on the ground. But you stopped short, and so now you will see a partial victory. You will see defeating of your enemies 3 times, but not a complete defeat." And I wonder why the king stopped short, why he didn't keep hitting those arrows on the ground. Was he embarrassed? Did he feel a bit of a fool? Was he hoping that God would just do everything for him and he wouldn't need to do anything? It would just be a miracle and it would all be sorted. Was he tired? Did he feel tired? Did he feel old? Did he feel like he'd done his bit and there was nothing else for him to do? And that kind of bears the question to ourselves, do we feel like our job is done? Are we getting too old to start any new things? Do we feel foolish starting something, not knowing where it's going to finish? Are we those that are happy to hide in the average, stay in the background, keep ourselves a little bit hidden? Will we just do enough, what's required, but never go the extra mile? And I think it's a great thing to reflect on as we're still in this difficult situation with this COVID-19 and the things that are going on in our lives, in our families, around us. It's a good moment to evaluate. And our other story at that special in October was the story of Bartimaeus, blind Bartimaeus, calling out to Jesus, asking for help, people trying to stop him calling out, saying Jesus was busy, don't keep calling. But Bartimaeus wouldn't give up. He wouldn't stay in the background. He wanted Jesus's attention. And Jesus says to him, "What do you want me to do for you?" And you think, well, that's obvious. He wants to see, but actually, does he? Or should he ask for a nice team of people to carry him everywhere he went to beg every day, because that was the life he was used to? Or should he ask Jesus for money so he didn't need to beg and he could just live comfortably in his home? Or what was it he would ask for? But Bartimaeus was absolutely certain he was going to ask for his sight back, even though that would change everything in his life. He would no longer be dependent on other people. He would have to find a new career. It would change everything. But he knew that he wanted that fresh sight from God, and that's what he asked for, and prepared to take the consequences of the change that would bring. Wow. So joy, holding nothing back, living our best life might mean a little bit of change. It might mean leaving some things behind us. It might mean holding on to God until we see the new thing that he wants us to do. So my prayer is for myself and for all of us in Storm and for anyone listening to this talk, that we will have the courage to go for gold, to ask God for those things that we really want, even though we don't know where that will lead us. And let's see what God will do for us in this new season. God bless, and look forward to seeing you all next week. Have a great week, everyone, and see you soon.